Okay, so we're going to start. Again, welcome so much. Thank you so much for being here. We're very excited about this conversation about human trafficking. I think that it's very important to constantly remind ourselves about what is human trafficking, the basics, because a lot of times we see a lot of misinformation, a lot of myths, a lot of things on social media that are not real, that are not accurate. So it's very, very important to continue like our education around human trafficking. But before that, I would love for our co-presenter, Wincey, to introduce yourself.
All right, thank you so much, Cristian, and welcome everybody. I'm Wincey Terry-Bryant. I am the arts co-chair of the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking. I'm a professional singer and I produce an event called Traffic Jam, and that's how I came to meet the wonderful people on the coalition. And I'm really excited about this conversation that we're going to have tonight, where we're going to debunk a lot of myths, and Cristian is going to share and I'm going to share, and then you guys get to, say like what your impressions are. And it's a triggering conversation. So if you need to step away, you need to take a breath, you need to close your screen, whatever you need to do, take care of yourself. Okay.
Yes, perfect. As you say, like, it's very important. We care about you. You're very important to us. You matter. And it's true. Like, this is a very conversation that can trigger, especially if you're a service providers, like past cases, new cases that you are seeing, new clients that you are seeing, or it can trigger, like, even, it can intersect even with personal trauma. So as Wincey said, please, please, please take care of yourself. You're very important to us and we really care about you. So my name is Cristian Eduardo. I am a survivor of international and domestic sex and labor trafficking. I am originally from Mexico. I am a person living with HIV. I identify as a gay male. I joined the anti-trafficking movement because as a male survivor, I saw that there were a deficit in services. Also, at the same time, I saw a deficit in services for immigrants, for male survivors. And in general, I started seeing that we needed more education and awareness around this topic. So I invite everyone. We also have one Human Trafficking 101 in Spanish on the YouTube channel for the New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking. I invite all people who work with the Spanish community or people who speak Spanish, like, to go check that link, check that video, and share it with your friends, clients, or people that you're working that speak in English. So without further notice, like, let's start this conversation. So why are we here tonight? As I say in the beginning, I think that human trafficking, sometimes it feels like it's all over the place. We see it in movies, we see it, we have read histories about it in the newspaper, on TV, but why is important? And Wincey, can you tell us why it's important, like, to attend like trainings like this?
Yeah, so human trafficking has become like a very popular hot button topic. And like Cristian said, it's in the news, but movies are sensationalizing it. And what I love about what we do at the coalition is we bring the awareness to you on the ground about how human trafficking is infiltrating our local communities. So everybody, I know when I learned about it, I thought it was like an out there, over there, foreign country, could not come near, the local neighborhood kind of issue. And I was surprised at how little I knew. So I want to ask you guys to use the chat. We're going to use the chat a lot tonight. On a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being the lowest and 10 being like I'm completely, fully knowledgeable, score your knowledge, your current knowledge of human trafficking. And whatever it is, we're going to make you a promise tonight. We're going to raise that number for you. But what would you say? Thanks, Gail. Like, give yourself a score. I think I know a little, I know a lot. I could teach a class. How are you feeling about your knowledge of human trafficking? Thank you, guys. We really appreciate, we love interaction. We love interaction. Thank you. So some people are under 5, some people are over 5. That's great. And we need everybody to be knowledgeable. So as Cristian asked me a few minutes ago, why is it important? Well, it's important because nobody can do everything. Everybody can do something about it, and anyone could be a victim. And so when you put those odds together, it's important that everybody knows about it so that everybody can keep their eyes and ears open so we can all work together to do something about it.
Yes, it is so true. Even that question like made me reflect about like, what number should I put myself? Like, and to be honest, I think that maybe an 8, because even I think that a lot of times we see so many updates, so many new information, studies about it. How is it working? And yes, I think that it's very important for everyone, like our community people. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a service provider, like, but continue educating yourself around like what is human trafficking. But let's start with that. Like, what is human trafficking? I feel that when we hear human trafficking, immediately to our minds it came like isolation, change, and a lot of times that's what I have seen like in a lot of spaces, like the flyers, information, they're always depiction like kids only with change, hands, or covering their mouths. But is this really true? Is this like the only form of trafficking? Is this what we are seeing? Where is this happening? Like, Wincey, can you give us a little bit about like what is human trafficking?
Yeah, so human trafficking is the force, fraud, or coercion of another human being for personal gain. It manifests itself in 2 main formats. So there's sex trafficking, which is the most popular. Like when you hear about human trafficking, that's probably the one that you've heard about. But there's also labor trafficking, and that's when somebody forces you to work for less than or no money by threatening you or taking your documents, making you false promises. And we're going to dig into some of the ways that has happened in by people's personal testimonies, things that we have learned about people who have shared their stories. So lived experienced experts, we call them lived experience experts, are people who've lived the experience and shared their experience to help educate us. So some of us are like really high on the scale, like we're up there by the 9s and the 10s. And some days I'm on the 9s. And then some days I slip down to the 7s because I realize that there's so much more, like there's always stuff to learn. And this is like crime is, it's always evolving. So traffickers are always trying to stay one step ahead of law enforcement, and they are coming up with new ways. And we're going to talk about like what we call grooming, the media. So trafficking has been around forever, but the media wasn't around forever. Like there was no internet. So as more technology was introduced, traffickers found new ways to traffic.
Yes, and just a reminder that human trafficking was recognized as a crime in the United States in 2000. So really a lot of policy and legislation, it's happening in all around the states, because we are really coming to understanding around trials, working with survivors and people with lived experience, what are the realities of human trafficking. Also a reminder that if sex trafficking and labor trafficking are 2 separated crime identities, they can happen at the same time. I just want to share a little bit about my experience. A lot of times when I was sex trafficked and I was kind of tired of being sex trafficked, I was labor trafficked. So it was a cycle of abuse between being sex trafficked and labor trafficking. So for all service providers, especially for people who are working with survivors, clients, or potential victims of trafficking, never like diminish or put away the idea that because one is happening, ignore the other or don't see the red flags for another one. So let's be just open about like the whole experience that a person is going through. Like so we can give them like the resources and the services that they deserve. There is one thing about human trafficking that is always catching my attention: minors. Is there something that we should know, Wincey, about minors and human trafficking?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because I'm glad you brought it up, because where minors are concerned, I understand that you don't have to prove force or fraud or coercion. Is that right, Cristian?
Yes, yes. So, and specifically for sex trafficking, I think that there are a lot of confusions. I have heard labels as child prostitute, child sex worker, and any of that exists. The reality is that if a minor is involved in a commercial sex act, that is the interchange, a commercial sex act is the interchange of something of value, not only money, for a sex act. So if a child is involved in a commercial sex act, by law, it's labeled as a human trafficking survivor or a human trafficking victim. There's no need for force, fraud, or coercion, like to be proved. And this is very important to know because in a lot of states, minors who are engaged in commercial sex, they are still being treated as criminals under prostitution law. So we need to be aware of this, like especially our policies and legislations, because minors and everyone, we cannot consent to our own exploitation. So in reality, we are being victims. That a lot of times is because we are vulnerable. A lot of times these minors are LGBTQ plus youth that are home runaways. There are minors that they can be immigrants. There are minors that don't have a safe housing and all these things. And the reality is that they are just looking to survive. And now that we're talking about commercial sex act, human trafficking doesn't always involve money. In a lot of cases, it really involves money, the interchange of a sex act for money in the case of sex trafficking. But in reality, it's more. It's something of value. And this something of value can be housing, can be food, can be medication, can be love, can be acceptance, compassion, um, can be just a safe place to stay. Like the reality is that traffickers, sex buyers prey on vulnerable individuals, including minors. And another thing that I really want to highlight, human trafficking also happens in adults. I feel that a lot of times we don't talk about it. There are a lot of services for minors. I think that we are more like empowered, like to protect minors, but a lot of times when we see an adult, I think that we are more biased, that we have a little bit of a stigma around it, that people that are engaged in prostitution or probably that are being sex trafficked, because we assume that because we are adults, like everyone can consent, that we have all the same privilege, that we have the same access to resources and services. But the reality is not. I was trafficked when I was 24 years old because I wasn't able to speak English, because I was recently diagnosed HIV positive, because I didn't have safe housing, I didn't have friends or family here. My legal status was also a big part of that, and I identify as a gay male, but I wasn't still out to the world. So all these vulnerabilities were what my traffickers prey upon me. So just be mindful that human trafficking can happen to anyone, regardless socioeconomic status, race, citizenship, where country you are coming from, and even it's very sad. But the reality is that probably human trafficking is happening even in our communities right now while we are talking. Wincey, anything else that you like to add?
Yeah, so I see that somebody asked the question, what's the age of a minor? And I'm glad that you asked that, because a minor is somebody under 18 years old. So just to clarify that, and just have people just be clear about, it doesn't have to be money, and a minor, I want to make sure I understood you correctly, Cristian. So if somebody says, well, I know she's 17 or I know she's 15, but she wants to do this, we split the money, are they still considered a victim, or are they considered a prostitute because they made their own decision?
No, minors cannot consent for engaging in commercial sex act. So there is no doubt. I think that this is something big that we really need to understand, that minors cannot consent for commercial sex act. And as adult service providers, it's our responsibility like to understand this and like to understand the law. A lot of times it's very interesting that you mentioned this, because in a lot of cases that I have seen, some minor who was engaged since 16 suddenly become 18, and police, if there is an interaction with police, and regardless this person being trafficked from 16 before 18, like it's now just considered like it's charged a lot of time with crimes of prostitution, loitering for purpose of prostitution. So there are a lot of states that are trying to raise the age of to engage in commercial sex act, well, like to consent to 21, so they can like because the reality is that to be 17 years old and to become an 18 years old is just 1 second. It's just 1 minute. And the reality is that nothing really changed when you are vulnerable and when you, especially the minors are there like trying to survive without support. So yes, so that's why it's very important. Attend trainings, keep an eye around policy and legislation in your state, in your county. So because this is very, very, very important and has a huge, huge impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. I really like this a lot because from one part, I see a lot that human trafficking, it's always like, oh, it's happening outside, it's happening in other countries, it's happening on change and all these things. And for the other part, I see that everyone thinks that human trafficking is smuggling. So, and a lot of times I have seen it even in the news, like, 10 people were trafficked and they were being smuggled. But right. Wincey, can we talk a little bit about like what the difference between human trafficking and smuggling?
Yeah, so no movement is required. No movement is required. In fact, there's a principal who shared a story about a girl who was being trafficked in his school during the day and going home every night. So her parents didn't detect anything, you know, the school didn't know it until she shared that she was being trafficked in school. So people, I remember when I first heard about it and I started going out to schools and talking to people about what was going on. And it's a very triggering conversation because a lot of times you'll be sharing and people will realize that that is happening either to me or to somebody that I know. But when I first started sharing, the kids would say things like, oh, that's right, it's the white van riding through the neighborhood with the double locks. That was a part of this myth where everybody's, oh, I saw a white van. And so I started running from it because I knew they were going to throw us in the van and take us far away. But as I just explained, there's no, that is not a requirement for something to be identified as human trafficking. They could possibly make you a transient and move you up and down the coast, and which is why, and we'll get into why New Jersey is, you know, such a hot spot for trafficking. But again, traffickers have gotten so sophisticated that they are trafficking people in their local neighborhoods, and these people don't realize that they're being trafficked necessarily, and they're going back to their places of residence every night.
Yes, you said something very, very important that I feel that it needs to highlight, that people don't realize that they are being trafficked, and this is a reality. I haven't met any survivor that in the beginning of them looking for services or resources, that even myself include, when I was looking for help, for support, I wasn't arriving and saying like, oh, I'm a survivor of human trafficking and I need support. Usually it's because some other things like health support, mental health support, because looking for housing on some other things. And that's the reality. So I think that that's why I love seeing like our attendees were from different backgrounds, because a lot of times we ask the question, and actually it's a very good question to ask right now. Like, how many of you have worked with survivors of human trafficking? Like, if you can answer on the chat, like yes or no, like that would be interesting, because a lot of times what happened is that we don't have the tools, we don't create the space, or we don't recognize the red flags for human trafficking, and that's how we miss it. So many stories I have heard about, like intakes for shelters, survivors going to emergency rooms, and that they weren't able, staff wasn't able to identify them as survivors of human trafficking or victims of human trafficking. But yes, as Wincey was saying, human trafficking is not the same as smuggling. Smuggling is when someone is moved from one country to another, one state to another, and it's not required on human trafficking. There is actually a lot of domestic human trafficking here in the United States, but smuggling can be a component of human trafficking, but they are not the same. This is very, very important to understand. Smuggling and human trafficking are two different crimes, and sometimes smuggling can be one component, one piece of the human trafficking story of one survivor. Wincey, something else that you like to add?
No, that's good information about the smuggling, because we really need to clear that up, because people just feel like if I'm still home, then I'm safe.
True. It is very true. Okay, so where is human trafficking happening? I think that by now we are understanding that the reality is that human trafficking is happening in all countries. Sadly, it's happening in all states. The most impacted vulnerable communities and marginalized communities, but the reality is that any of us can be a victim of human trafficking. I'm always saying that sex buyers and traffickers, they prey upon vulnerabilities. And if you're a human, in one point of your life, in one point of your life, you are going to be vulnerable. So Wincey, where does this put New Jersey around human trafficking?
Yeah, so New Jersey is 12th in the state ranks. That's pretty high considering how many states we have in the US. And the reason, because people, again, a lot of times people are kind of half listening until I tell them that it's happening here in New Jersey and we're high in the ranks. So why? Because New Jersey, we have airports and seaports and bus stations and train stations, and we house a lot of big events. So we bring a lot of people in. New Jersey is the gateway to the world. If you want to go any place nationally or internationally, you can get there from New Jersey. We're a gateway. You can get there from our airports, our train stations, and traffickers know that. They also know that you can jump on a highway. I can take one of your children, throw them in the trunk of my car or in the back seat of my car. I can be in another state in less than an hour. I can be in Philly. I can be in Connecticut. I can be in Delaware. I can be, give me 2 hours. I can be even further, 3 hours. I could be in DC. And so traffickers know that we're densely populated. We have lots of tourist destinations. We have the Meadowlands, Madison Square Garden, places that people come from all over the world to attend events. And large events, a lot of people use large events to buy boys and girls, women and men. So they will come into town under the cloak of just attending the event, but that's also a place where people trade humans. A lot of human trafficking going on in these events. So New Jersey is a hot spot, and that's why we're also happy that all of you are on this call so that you can get educated.
Yes, it's very, very important. One part that you say, like demand. I think that usually when we talk about human trafficking, we most of the time talk about the victim, the survivors, and the traffickers. But we all most of the time live like this third part. There is the demand, the sex buyers. The reality is that sex buyers are the main economic gear in between like human trafficking. They are the ones that giving like the money for traffickers, like to exploit people. They are the ones who are demanding. If demand will cease, there will be no need for human trafficking. That is something very important to understand, because a lot of ways to combat human trafficking, it can be awareness, education, but also demand reduction. And that's very important, because I think that socially we have a kind of normalized demand, that it's okay if someone with money can access someone else's bodies regardless their situation. So it's very, very important to keep that in mind, that demand is part of this system and demand is part of human trafficking.
That's good.
Perfect. So why does human trafficking happen? And as we were saying, like human trafficking is a very profitable business. It generates money than guns or drugs. And Wincey, do you want to talk a little bit about like what is the meaning of this, that it generates more money than guns and drugs, and why?
Yeah. So I remember when I first got involved in helping to raise awareness, and I went to see a movie in the theaters called Tricked, and it was a human trafficking awareness movie, and they were interviewing a trafficker, and he was saying that. And so when I tell this story, a lot of people say, well, why didn't they just arrest the trafficker? Well, if you are anywhere close to my age and you remember like old movies where like they would, the pimps would go pick up their prostitutes who had been arrested from like the precinct, it was because the prostitutes were caught, quote unquote, in the act where the pimps were like nowhere around. So that's why they were free to come in and pick up their, prostitutes and take them away. So because they had not caught this trafficker actually doing anything, he felt liberated to speak about what his motivation was. And he said, well, think about it. You can sell a drug one time and it's gone. You sell a gun one time and, it's out of your hands. Somebody else would have to sell it. But you can sell a person over and over and over again. So as long as I get a stable of victims, women or children or whatever the demand is for, as long as I can supply that demand, I can always generate and regenerate income.
Yes, that is so true. It is very important to understand that what you were saying, that even it has been happening like in all the United States around, like that a lot of times the people who are being exploited, the people who are being forced, coerced into commercial sex act, they are the ones who ended up in jail. Well, like the pimps, the traffickers, like are free roaming, because a lot of times, and we are going to talk a little bit later about this, like the grooming process, they make sure that everything is under the person who is engaged on the commercial sex act. And so literally they are like, I'm out of the picture. Even if law enforcement came, like I didn't do anything. And the reality is that it's very hard to prove psychological coercion as a tool of to control people. And again, there is always a demand. Human trafficking is happening because the demand is so high, and traffickers are seeing that it's profitable. So it's very, very, very important that we understand this part. It's not okay to buy another human being just because you have like the money or the privilege to do it. I feel that that's very dehumanizing. I think that it's really connected about like how we perceive one each other. I think that, and there's one more thing. When even one of us has a price, we all have a price. And this has a huge impact on everyone. So if this is happening to someone that you don't know, this is happening to someone in your community, like sooner or later, trafficking can impact your life. So let's be very mindful about this. I think that as a society, we have normalized it's okay to sex buyers are roaming. It's okay when they are giving money to our communities. The reality is that not. Sexual violence cannot be condoned, and we should be advocating for more resources, services, regardless how people enter or engage in commercial sex acts. So who is human traffic? Wincey, I think that we talk a little bit about it, but who can be trafficked?
Anybody could be a victim. And that's one of the things that I always tell people, because especially when I go into schools, all of the kids feel like I'm talking about somebody else. It could not possibly happen to them. Even when I go into churches and I'm telling the story, they think I'm telling a story about things that could never happen there. And then I start talking to them about grooming and how sophisticated traffickers have gotten, so that there was a story about a couple. They were not really a couple, but a man and a woman who joined a church and stayed for years and joined different auxiliaries in the church so that they could gain the trust of the members there. And then they began to to get them in precarious situations, to videotape them, to bribe them, to take pictures and, to abuse them sexually and then take pictures and then threaten them with them. So anybody could be a victim. There's also what we call ACEs, so the adverse childhood experiences. Traffickers look for people that they can engage, manipulate, gain their trust. And unfortunately, people who have experienced those adverse childhood experiences, such as maybe they've been abused or they saw a lot of violence in the home, domestic violence. They may be, maybe they are on the verge of being homeless, or they could have been, they've seen a lot of pain in their life or experienced things that young people shouldn't experience. And they are kind of grappling with how to navigate their way through life, maybe looking for a friend, somebody to speak to, talk to. And traffickers kind of look for people who might need somebody. That's why it's important, all parents, I'm talking to the parents now. It's really important for you to create a safe space in your home and between you and your children so that they feel safe enough to talk to you about anything.
Yes, and just to highlight the words of Wincey, like it can happen to anyone. I have heard cases from, as you say, from romantic partners. I have heard cases in sports where the manager was trafficking the athlete. I have heard cases in colleges where the professor was exploiting the students. I have here, I think that the ones that we don't talk about is familial trafficking. When someone in the family is forced to engage in commercial sex act, a minor, a lot of times is this way, because in some communities it has happened for generations, so it has been normalized. A lot of times it's because out of poverty, because someone came and offered them like to pay bills and all these things. So familial trafficking is very real, and it's very, I have heard so many cases in different states, and the reality is that we don't talk enough about it. Traffickers, the reality is that are just preying on vulnerable individuals. And not only that, like also sex buyers. Sex buyers know the communities that are suffering from poverty, from oppression, that they lack resources. So yes, I think that we need to understand that we all can be victims of human trafficking. That's why we are all here learning to support one each other and to really understand that human trafficking is happening like all around us. Yes, but everyone can help prevent it by doing what we're doing now, like literally really going to trainings, talking about this. And one thing that I want for all of you to do is that now that you're attending this, share this conversation with friends, family, co-workers, people around you, so we create like this change of education and awareness around us. So now we're going to watch a video about, and we will love to hear your thoughts after it. If you could share it on the chat. Wincey, are you ready to? Perfect.
You just take a seat.
All right.
Thank you so much for coming in. I'm Mary, by the way.
Hi, Mary. I'm Tonight.
Tonight, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Don't mind the giant microphone above your head.
I'll try not to.
There are 3 photos in front of you. If you could just pick one, it doesn't really matter which one it is, and show that one to us.
All right.
Could you describe her to us?
She looks youthful. I feel like this is one of those situations where if I say he's 23, then he's actually going to be 16.
Hispanic, maybe not full, but part. Similar to me, actually.
Well, I mean, she's young, so probably has a lot of things to look forward to.
I would describe him as friendly.
She looks, happy. She doesn't look shy, but confident.
Anything she puts her mind to, she could achieve.
We actually have his story. If you could read that out loud to us.
Okay, Marcus. I grew up really close to my parents. Adriana. I grew up with my brother and sister.
Amy. I remember watching the Olympics on TV when I was 5 and being totally in awe of the sprinters.
I was the middle child and easily the quietest.
I felt like no one ever saw me or cared.
Dad was too drunk to keep a job, and he never even saw me unless I was in his way.
Mom worked 2 jobs to make sure we had food for every meal, so she was never here to know when he would hit us.
One day when I went to the mall, like I like to do to be out of the house, a man came up to me and told me I was beautiful and asked me on a date.
On our first date, he drove me around in his car and said we could eat whatever I wanted.
Every time we were together, he bought me something new.
Tom really cared about me, and Tom really made me feel special.
I was in love with him.
After only going out for 3 weeks, Tom offered me a way out of my home, asked me to move in with him.
So when he asked me to have sex with him, I did.
He would put his hand over my face until I couldn't breathe.
Tom had friends over pretty regularly, and I could tell that some of his friends were into me.
So I kept my door locked and hoped that no one would bother me.
After a few nights of crashing there, he said that I still owed him for letting me stay at his place.
He said he had a friend who wanted to spend an hour with me.
He told me I might have to do some stuff, but not to worry about it. It's not a big deal.
When I didn't want to, he slapped me and said no one ever cared about me like he did.
But I didn't know what else to do because I needed a place to stay.
His friends forced themselves on me and took turns while he watched.
One by one, they come down to the basement, telling me how pretty I am.
When they're on top of me, I just close my eyes and pretend I'm running.
I'm exhausted and I don't know what to do.
My name is Adriana, I'm 16 years old.
My name is Marcus, I'm 14 years old.
My name is Amy, I'm 12 years old.
I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
And I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
That was very different than what I thought. Especially because like being a girl and imagining like if that was me, like that's, I don't even know. I can't even imagine what that would be like.
She deserves to be a kid, just like what she is in this picture.
It being so close to home is something that makes me want to jump out of this chair.
I wouldn't think that Grand Rapids is a place where anything like this would ever happen.
Because you don't want it to happen to anybody, and you really don't want it to happen to people that live where you live.
Thank you for sharing her story with us. I'd like to show you something if you wouldn't mind taking her picture and following me to the gym.
Oh, wow.
I expected something certainly a lot smaller.
Bar graphs and numbers, and that these are actual people. I don't know, in like my world, in my bubble or whatever, we don't talk about this. It's not something you think about.
You know, what we see is only on the surface.
I mean, looking at this, sex trafficking doesn't have any discrimination, that's for sure. Ages, genders, can affect anybody.
It hits you right in your heart, your gut, your stomach. It's like, wow. Now it's like I feel like I have this weight of responsibility to see how I can help.
Changes through greater awareness and making people realize that this does happen here and will continue to happen until we decide to make it stop.
So we want to ask you to put your reaction. You can do one-word reactions in the chat. You can do emojis. Yeah, in my stomach. Yeah, picture wall of people. Yep. Powerful. Stunned, sure. Haunting in our bubble. Realize it's inside our bubble too. That's right. So much pain, overwhelming, heartbreaking. Yeah, sad face. Wow. And that's just West Michigan. So if you look at the population of West Michigan and then compare it to the population of New Jersey, just imagine how much this is happening here in New Jersey because we're so densely populated. Yes, wow, heartbreaking, profound.
I feel that a lot of times when we talk about human trafficking, under the label of victim survivors, we forget that there are people from our communities. There are people that maybe we met when we were like in primary school, people that we played when we were kids, people that we see when we walk our streets. And a lot of times people who are being trafficked, they never escape. They don't survive. I'm very grateful of being a survivor, but at the same time, it's very sad that human trafficking is happening, and knowing that not everyone is going to have that gift of getting out of it, or like receiving support, resources, or even just the idea that it's happening right now to them. It's painful. It's we need like to do our part all together, like to stop this.
Yeah, so special vulnerabilities to trafficking, because we still want to be clear that anybody could be a victim, but traffickers are looking for naive and impressionable people. So that's what we mean when we say young, but young is not the only criteria for being trafficked, as Cristian has said over and over again. People who have problems at home, people who might be in the foster care system, people who may have experienced prior sexual abuse, homelessness, somebody who might have a disability, the LGBTQ and youth communities, people who experience substance abuse or drug use. They're looking for people who have vulnerabilities that make them in the traffickers' psychology easier to groom, easier to connect with.
Yes, and it's very important to understand that all these communities that are vulnerable, if we as families, if we as community, as service providers, if we don't fulfill their needs, the ones who are going to fulfill their needs with a very high price are going to be traffickers. So, and I think that still there is a lot of stigma around people with disability, people experiencing homelessness, the LGBTQ plus community, people using or abusing substances. There is still a lot of stigma. We a lot of times say things like, oh, they are doing it because they want, because they are lazy, because we are justifying it instead of really approaching them and remind ourselves that they are humans, that we really don't know their path. And as the video said, like there's always a story. Like I have met hundreds of survivors are people who are still in prostitution, survivors who have been in prostitution for years, people from a lot of vulnerable marginalized communities, and that's the reality. There's always a story. The reality is that a lot of times we think that people engage in commercial sex act as a first choice, as a dream. I haven't met anyone until today. And I experienced trafficking between Mexico, Canada, and here in the United States. And all my experiences, there were always a story, always a vulnerability that traffickers abuse or prey upon. So it's very, very important to highlight this. Stop like the bias, stop like being discriminatory towards all this community, but really like expand like our services. Like it won't hurt anyone like to educate yourself about the LGBTQ plus community, people with disability, yeah, and what are the barriers that they are facing. Anything else, Wincey, that you would like to add?
No, you covered it, Cristian.
Perfect. So traffickers see their violence everywhere, but let's talk a little bit about it. And I think that Wincey said a little bit in the beginning that before they were on the internet, that now, like, even if it's like a major tool for communication, that even if we are using it now, like, sadly, also traffickers like are evolving. Like, so what are some of the ways that trafficker gets their victim, Wincey?
Yeah, well, there's what they call boyfriending into trafficking. And one of the things that I do in the work that I do is I produce events. And in my events, I produce vignettes, so little short like acting scenes where people can learn history or social emotional learning, things like that. And when I learned about human trafficking, and I'm saying this because I want all of you to think about like your area of expertise, what it is that you do, who is in your sphere of influence, who you can talk to, the way that you do it. So I started writing these vignettes so that audiences can see how traffickers identify and then groom their victims. And they're all based on true stories. So there's one story, there's one short scene where this girl is thanking her boyfriend for moving her away from her neighborhood and her family. And she's so excited and she loves him and she's so grateful. And he said, yeah, it took me 4 years to convince you. Then he locks her out of the apartment and, you know, starts to traffic her. And it's based on a story that this woman tells about how she dated a guy for 4 years and she thought that he was her man. So when he asked her to move away, that wasn't so far-fetched for her. And then, you know, he put her out on the street, basically. So boyfriending, and there are many, many stories of boyfriending, job offers, a victim, a formerly trafficked victim, a lived experienced expert shared her story with me about how she wanted to be a model. She worked at a fast food restaurant with another girl who worked at a fast food restaurant, and she was such a beautiful girl, pretty girl. And she said, she told her, she said, what do you do when you leave here? She said, I model. She said, I would love to be a model. I've always wanted to model. And the girl said to her, oh, you could definitely model. You have the face for it. You have the bone structure. You have the long neck. And all you need is a portfolio. And what they ended up doing was, you have to pay for your portfolio. This is how you'll do it. You just have to do this one time. You just have to sleep with one guy. And then she said it just kept happening. When she realized that she was never going to be able to afford her portfolio, she realized that she was in so deep. They kept telling her that she owed them. Now they made friends with her and knew about her family and began to threaten her that, you know, they would do things to her family members. So it's hidden in plain sight. This girl was going to work every day at the fast food restaurant and then being trafficked for a portfolio. There's Candy magazine selling gang recruitment. And when you think about this, just if you've ever watched the Animal Channel, anytime they want to take an animal down, like if the hyenas want to take a lion down, they have to first separate him from the pride. So what is very common for like gang recruiters and traffickers is they want to separate you from your friends and your family, people who might be concerned about you. They're looking for you to not have so many connections. That's why it's important to keep these relationships tight with your children, because the minute they start to isolate you, then they're counting on you not being able to tell anybody because you've got nobody to tell, or you trust them so much that by the time you realize that you are in a situation that you no longer want to be in, they have so much dirt or secrets on you that you feel like maybe you can buy your way out of the situation. There's some familial trafficking, which Cristian talked about. Survival sex. People talk about how I did it because I needed to eat. I did it because I needed a place to stay. And online grooming, predators are popping in and out of chat rooms, posing as teenagers, middle schoolers, making friends with your kids and getting them to trust them. Oh, did you say you go to Abraham Lincoln School? No. What school did you say you go to again? Ben Franklin. Oh, Ben Franklin. And then they write that down. And they keep collecting information until they have enough to make your child or your loved one, trust them enough to meet them someplace, and then it's on.
Yes, yes, yes. And around survival sex, I just want like for you to think about it, because I think that we are very quick for discrimination and all the stigma. People who are engaging on survival sex, they have tried so many other things. Usually we see that the communities engaged in survival sex are LGBTQ plus youth, homelessness, all these vulnerable communities that we talked before. And I have heard that a lot of people say like, but they are consenting. And the reality is that when you cannot cover your basic needs, when you don't have access to services, when you don't have resources, when you really are like hungry, thirsty, because I have been there, there is no consent. There is no consent. You cannot consent because your options are like, oh, or I give away the ownership of my body, or I eat. And I think that when you choose is there's something beneficial in either path that you are taking. So I just want people like to really think about it. Don't jump to conclusions when someone is engaging in prostitution, because a lot of cases, that is what it's happening. We say them hearing and saying like that they are consenting, but when in reality there is other more things behind.
And that's what we talked about. Yeah.
Yes. As you were saying, Wincey, like traffickers use manipulation and isolation to groom in the real and the virtual world. Like, do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Well, just to piggyback or to scaffold on what I just talked about social media, compliment. So, they said that social media for children, they did a study and they said that it is like, because of these endorphins that are released in the brain and all the stuff that's happening when somebody likes your post, it is like releasing a child in a candy store and telling them to choose broccoli. Social media is a real addiction. So to have a trafficker, a predator, start clicking on your chats and liking your posts, you feel like you have a real friend. You start, one of the things I start my presentations with is I ask kids, you talk to strangers? And they all say, no, we don't talk to strangers. I say, you play video games? Yeah, we play video games. You ever play with anybody you've never seen? And then it gets quiet, because then they realize, wow, that is a stranger, because I've never seen them. So these strangers do things like, when you're playing video games, and this is the stuff that we as grown-ups and, adults, older people don't necessarily know. You're playing video games with people you don't know. There are levels to this. And when you get to certain levels, you need cash, bucks, to move to the next level, to progress to the next level. Otherwise, you are locked on a level that nobody's playing on anymore. So when you meet somebody and you've been playing with them and they say, hey, let's move to another platform. Hey, let's play on another platform. Well, I don't have money to go over there. I'll pay for you because I just love playing with you. And then they say later, you owe me. So that's what one of the things that traffickers do when they are grooming, they are making friends and they're willing to put in the investment of time. They say, I read a study that said a trafficker's talking to approximately 40 victims at a time. They know everybody's not going to bite, but somebody's going to bite.
Yes, it is very true. I play video games and I'm always very concerned about this, how like even you hear the voices of kids like playing with you, and like how easy also is like this transaction of giving like any item that it's on the game that is only be accessed through cash, box, or like, yes, and like you give it to them and this create like a bond, and it's a bond like that is like, oh, you owe me. Remember that I got you like that high price and like that it's unique and all these things. And I think that a lot of times we miss this. So I think that it's very, very important. And yeah, I knew that it was the next one, to keep an eye about like what our kids are doing and adolescents are youth, even as adults, like which apps are we using, which apps are we communicating, because for example, Snapchat is really a big one. Like even when chatting, messages can disappear. Can you imagine if your kid has been trafficked and you need to prove it? How are you going to prove it if messages disappear after being read like 1 or 2 times? So be very, very mindful about reviewing the apps that are installed, the new apps. I think that we always see, especially on social media, when a new app becomes like super high, like sharing everywhere, like download it, please. We hear our kids saying and talking about like the new apps and all these things, the new game. Like, so keep an eye on it, because traffickers are really using these tools with grooming the people, kids, like to lure them like to trafficking. Wincey, something else that you like to add?
I want to talk about the red flags.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So how do we recognize the red flags of exploitation and abuse?
So we have this great acrostic. It's great for giving you an idea of how to, like, what kinds of things to look for, because we're talking about how this can be happening. It happens in plain sight. So how do you know if you are like what you're seeing? The truth is, you may not know for sure what you're seeing. You can leave the act on it to the authorities, but you want to respond to it, or you can respond to it and leave you definitely want to do something about whatever it is that you see. So the things that you're looking out for, people who might be reluctant to speak. If you go into a nail salon or a beauty parlor or a restaurant, and for instance, there was a story on CNN about girls who were trafficked. They were being brought from Africa here, and you can still Google it because it's actually still up there. They were forced to braid hair. So this is labor trafficking, 18 and 20 hours on their feet. They showed the living conditions. These girls were chained to basement beds and mattresses on the floor. You could see the urine in the mattress. They were not released to go to the bathroom or to wash themselves until it was time for them to go back to work. And people ask them things like, well, why didn't you just tell somebody when you were doing hair? But when you think about this brain hacking that we've been talking about, the grooming, how they are, they make the investment of time. They tell you, I've got your documents. And that's what they told these girls. I've got your documents. You go running out in the street, the police are going to arrest you. They're going to throw you in jail. You bring disgrace on your family. They will never see you again. And if you're not even from this country, or you think about, in New Jersey, you're not even allowed to rent a car until you're 25 years old. I believe it's because your brain is not fully developed. So if an adult who is respected in a community and runs a business tells you that if you go running out in the street and ask for help, the police is going to believe them over you, a kid who doesn't have any documentation, you might be inclined to believe that. So you're looking for people who might be reluctant to speak, who are exhausted. You heard some of the testimonials when they were reading from Stop This Traffic. When I was exhausted, they climb on top of me, I pretend I'm running. If they're dominated or controlled, if you saw the news article where the flight attendant helped the young girl because she was trying to, every time she went to say something to the young girl on the plane, the man who she was traveling with spoke for her. So somebody's being dominated or controlled. If you see people and they're not free to speak, they look nervous about even trying to answer your question, that's a red flag. People who are fearful, they work long hours. They might be alienated from family and friends, like the example I gave you about the girl who was separated from her family. Gifts from older partners. I tell parents all the time, if all of a sudden your children are showing up with things that you know you didn't pay for and they can't afford, ask questions. Signs of abuse. I mean, we have a wonderful video that was made by the coalition to help healthcare workers identify abuse. And one of the first things that a victim will say is, oh, I fell. They'll make excuses. They're afraid. So they'll make excuses, or they don't want to get their trafficker in trouble, because sometimes that bond is so tight that they feel like that's their man. And I deserved to get hit. and I can't let you get my man in trouble. I'm not going to get my man in trouble. He hit me. If I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, this mother told a story about how her daughter didn't make enough money for her trafficker. So he set her on fire. And the girl made it, he poured gasoline on her and set her on fire. The girl said, it's my fault. I should have stayed out there longer. I should have made more money for him. So if you see any of these signs, Cristian, tell us about these numbers, these phone
Yes,
numbers.
please, if you see something, if you suspect something, the best that you can do is to report to the human trafficking hotline. It's 24 hours and the number is 888-373-7888. And we're going to ask our attendees, like maybe a lot of you have it already, but please add it to your phone right now, because you can be out in a restaurant, you can be out on the streets, you can be maybe with the doctor, and if you see something, the best that you can do is called the human trafficking hotline. And a lot of times I think that we really diminish the impact of this, but you can save someone's life, like seriously. So again, the number is 888-373-7888. Your safety is first. I really don't encourage a lot of people like to really interact directly, because especially we don't know what's happening. We don't know if it's gun control. We don't know if the trafficker has weapons. So the best that you can do is your safety first and report it to the human trafficking hotline.
Yeah, that's great. And you don't have to be right. Don't worry about being right. If you see
Yes.
say something.
Yes. It's better if they do an investigation and that they discover that everything is okay, then don't call and let the victim or survivors continue being trafficked. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So we talked a little about this, why victims find it hard to leave. And in my travels, in the presentations that I do, I find that a lot of times audience members get stuck here. They get stuck in the logic of it. Like they want to understand the logic of a person who would, quote unquote, allow themselves to be abused. But as I said, this is what is known as, there's an organization that works with a coalition. We're a bunch of organizations, and I love that about us. And it's called New Jersey Safe and Sound. And they came up with this brochure about mind hacking. And when I explain this to kids, because when I first start to talk to them, of course, they insisted this can't happen. And I asked them, who has a computer? They all say, we have one or we've operated one. Have you ever been hacked? Like, what happens when you're being hacked? Oh, that's when somebody's like, they're controlling your computer from like remotely from someplace else. That is exactly what people can do to a mind. They can do that with your mind. They take the time to get you to trust them, and then they put thoughts in your head that you start to believe might be true. Like, nobody else is going to want me, or you love me so much, or I brought this on myself, or you're the only person who would take care of me like this, or I just can't make it without you, or we're going to be together forever, or I just have to do this a little bit longer, and when I replace myself, then I won't have to do this anymore, or he's doing this because he loves me. So things like that. Again, gift giving, now you owe me. Like I said, victims, a lot of times they think it's their fault, or some of the things that I said. I'm ashamed. One of the girls was explaining how when she came to her trafficker and said, I'm going home, he said, you going home to your mother, who I've had you arguing with, like, for years now? You think she's going to take you back? You go home to your father and tell him that you've been out here on your back? You think your father's not going to be ashamed of you now? So when you think about that, you can understand a little better why it's not as easy as it sounds to just wash your hands of it and walk away. There's a whole mental acquisition that has occurred.
Yes, and I just say, like, a lot of times there are a lot of barriers. Like, traffickers constantly use like threats like to family members, to friends, to pets, to disclosure like health status, if you are gay, lesbian, transsexual, to your family, to your community, to say or share the things that you have been engaged on, like to shame you, to make you feel more guilty. And this is very, a lot of times the traffickers become the first person who show love to the victims. So that's why I think that it's very, very disrespectful when a no to ask, a no to say please is like why you didn't leave. Like I think that that's very disrespectful. It's not trauma informed. Like you are really minimizing the person for just their experience. Well, we need to remember that regardless someone else's experiences, we are all still human beings.
Right. And I just want to add something about the forced drug taking. I have heard in survivors talk about how they were drugged to be able to, like, they were drugged to do it. And then they started to allow or accept or even ask, but they became addicted. And then they wanted the drugs, like they needed the drugs to endure it. So when you think about like a drug addiction, these are not people who are in control of like their faculties and their mentality. It's an addiction, and they've been, you know, the traffickers purposely get them addicted to gain and maintain control.
Yes, that is very true. It's one of the forms of disassociation that it's commonly used by victims. And it's true, the idea is like to continue this debt bondage, like, oh, but I have been providing you drugs, even when they were the ones who initiated them in drugs. So now you own me for like housing, food, and all these things, and for drugs. So we need to understand that, like, that's very important. That's why I say that human trafficking really interacts with other forms of abuse and violence, and it's not like a bubble isolated itself. So what are we doing about it? Well, we are doing the one in the middle, educating, Survivor Informed Speaker Bureau, safety surveys, and all these webinars. The New Jersey Coalition Against Human Trafficking is very, very dedicated to create this training that are survivor informed, that are led by survivors, who people who work in the community, and people who really have experience working alongside this. We really believe that education is a great part of prevention. But Wincey, what else are we doing?
Well, we have these, so let me talk about Safe Saturdays, because that's a program that is available in your local communities. Like I said, I'm a singer, and what I realized when I learned more about human trafficking and raising awareness, everybody can do something. So that's why I asked you to start thinking about like your audiences, like who are the people who are in your sphere of influence? Would you want a seminar at your job? Would you want a program for the families in your neighborhood? What I wanted to do was educate the young audiences, the early childhood audiences, in a way that they could consume this information, like digest it safely, and then give something to the parents. So I wrote like a little jingle, like safe, I gotta be safe, where kids get to learn about like what safe relationships look like. There's a book, the coalition that got down with me on this. So we do these presentations in local libraries. And if it's something you're interested in, you can go right to our website, safernewjersey.org, and you can apply for a program that's called Safe Saturdays. Like I said, if you are interested in having a speaker come to your organization, you might be a member of a church or a mosque or like a community group, or everybody needs to know about this information, because each person can teach another person. So each one teach one. We also do a lot with legislation. So a lot of the laws that are passed around this, we have a whole legislative committee who works on this, and there's a place for you on the coalition. And what I love about it is that the coalition, we have all of these different committees. We're like a 200 affiliate organization. So we have like a bunch of individual members. We have a bunch of groups. We're completely volunteer run. And we would love for you to join forces with us. You might be able to come to 10 events, or you might only be able to come to one. You might be able to pick up a phone and call a legislator and say, we need you to pass this bill, or you might be able to, just forward an email. But like I said, when you hear this, a lot of times people end up feeling overwhelmed by the information, but you don't have to stop there. There's something that you can do to help make a difference. And that's what we want you to consider joining.
Yes, perfect. So what you can do about it? The first part is educate yourself, your family, and your community. We really encourage to extend this conversation with your family, your friends, your loved ones, even on a school, as Wincey was saying, like you can invite us to your kid's school, like to train them about it. Choose fair trade certified product like chocolate or coffee to decrease labor trafficking. What else we can do, Wincey?
So you can be an ally, an advocate. You can join our education committee. You can make a donation to the coalition. Be a smart consumer. Take a note of what kinds of products you are buying. Join our mailing list on the coalition. Share it with other people. When you see events that we're having, post it on your Facebook, put it up on, tweet it out, put it up on Instagram. The more people who know about this, you see, education is actually prevention. And one of the reasons I started going into schools is because I felt like if I could precede the traffickers, if I could get in front of these children being approached by educating them so that when something like that is presented to them, they say, oh, wait a minute, I know what this is. This lady came to my school and she said that if somebody asks me to do something and split the money with them, or if somebody asks me, don't tell anybody where I'm going, or if somebody asks me to come and do that kind of thing, that they have a much better chance. We got to give our kids a shot. And the only way we can give them a shot is to educate them. So we got to get in front of this situation. We don't want to just respond, like only respond. We need to respond, but we got to educate too. And so that's why we need all hands on deck. Yes, perfect. And again, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, remember the phone number is 888-3737-888. Please add it to your phone, put it there, National Human Trafficking Hotline. If you see something, say something. And for more information, go to surfernewjersey.org. And let's start making a change altogether, because this is what it's about. If we take care about one each other as communities, as members, as human beings, like we can put a stop to human trafficking. Wincey, something else that you would like to add? No, I think that that's great. Just like you said, we have to all work together. It's not going to happen unless we're not going to stop human trafficking if people just take the information and then wash their hands of it, like just walk away and say, that was sad and that was educational. And I hope they will do something about it. You are they. We're all the they that has to do something about it. Yes. And we already take the first step. Like by being here, you're taking the first step. So very happy that you're here. We have around 10 minutes for Q&As. I saw a couple of Q&As. The age from minors, it's like 18, as we were saying. I saw also some other people saying there are no silly questions, there are no wrong questions. I see that it says like, for those who may not realize that they're being trafficked, what might be their thinking is happening, or what might their perception be? As we were talking about, and I think that Wincey really talked about this, like how coercion and grooming plays a little big part of this. It's very hard when you're a victim to identify that you are being trafficked because of the impact of trauma, because the isolation and all the coercive tools that are being implemented, you omnipresence, that your trafficker knows everyone and knows everything that is happening around you, that they know your family, that they know your friends, that they know everyone in your school. So the idea is that start breaking down your will, so you are more prone, like for coercion, more prone for and you are exhausted, debilitated, and that you don't have like the will like to oppose it. The reality is that also trauma bonding plays a big role when there is this bonding that Wincey was mentioning, like
oh, but I love my trafficker. And if my trafficker is hitting me, my trafficker is like, as the case that she shared, like, it's because I deserve it. Like, this is the way that this is working. This is what it looks like for me. And so it's very, very important. I think that we can do a little bit of the comparison with domestic violence. A lot of times, like, even when physical violence is happening, people who are experiencing domestic violence cannot identify that the domestic violence is happening. It's very similar with human trafficking. When someone is being trafficked, when someone is exploited, it's very hard the person to self-identify. A lot of times we reach out for help because of all the medical, psychological, and emotional consequences of being exploited sexually or laborally. But yes, it's extremely hard. I haven't met, to be honest, a survivor who was looking for help and they self-identify as survivors of human trafficking. When I was looking for help, to be honest, I didn't really understood what was happening. Trauma has a lot of impact in memory. It's very hard to recall traumatic events a lot of times as a timeline. There are times that you disassociate, like psychologically or because of the use of substances. So there are parts that a lot of times survivors, we don't remember. So we cannot put all the pieces together because it's the trauma isolation, the trauma bonding, the control, the threats, the menaces. So a lot is happening at the same time. So it's very hard for someone themselves to identify and to say like, oh, I think that I'm in a situation of human trafficking because I'm being psychological coerced and I'm being threatened by this. Because if you put the pieces together, they look like different things. They can look like domestic violence, intimate violence partner, but a lot of times people cannot identify that it's human trafficking. Human trafficking really intersects with a lot of other forms of abuse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good.
Any other question that? I don't see any other question. No, thank you all of you for being here.
Thanks for all the love in the chat. Now we want your post score. So a lot of you put your score like on a scale from 1 to 10, what you felt your knowledge of human trafficking was. So now we want your post presentation score. Tell us what you went from. Okay, good. So now we're up. Good. That's what we want to know. So, and if you can put your, like, I started at a 5 and I went to an 8. So like 5/8 or 7/9 or wherever you started and where you went. Okay, beautiful. Love that. So you went from a 5 to 8. That's what we want to do. And that encourages us. So thank you so much for sharing that, because that's really what we want to do. We want to equip you to start a conversation with other people, and you don't have to know, you don't have to have all the answers. So I do all ages, Gail. Yep. And yep, there are similar presentations for older students. We have an education committee. And like I said, I do traffic jam. So I bring actors into schools to act out scenarios so that kids can see how traffickers groom them. Yeah. So yeah, so we really, really appreciate that. Now, I believe we have a survey that if you'll just take a minute to do the survey, it really helps us ensure that we're supporting your learning and as we continue to create these presentations, we want to make sure that we are speaking to the actual need, not over your heads, not giving you any kind of fluff. What's really important, and Cristian said it, is that we're survivor informed. So this is not just stats, things that we read, not from movies. You know, we are not only asking survivors about real lived experience, but we are also getting guidance on how to shape it, how to shape the presentation, how to present it so that it is in a respectful and caring way, as I don't even want to say trigger free, because that's not even possible with this data, this information, but just as sensitive and socially responsible as possible.
Yes, it is true. We're very, very, very thankful that you are here. There's going to be a link so you can share this conversation, this training with all the people around you. Please do it. And the link for it's right here. So I'm going to put it on the chat so everyone can access it. And again, thank you, seriously, thank you so much for attending. If you have any question, don't hesitate to contact us. We are here to answer all your questions. Here is
Here it is. Great.
Perfect.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you for all the love in the chat. We really, really appreciate that. That means everything to us. Thank you. And thank you.
Perfect.
For being here.
And stay in touch with us. We love receiving feedback, ideas, and again, if you need any training, we are here to support you.
Yes, absolutely. And join the mailing list on the coalition.
Yes.
At the website so that you can be kept abreast of all the things that we're doing. You may not be able to make them all, but if you know about them, if you don't know about them, you can't make any of them. So come to something, okay?
Yes, perfect. Okay, thank you, everyone.